Dr. Van Einsiedel is, you've probably seen on the flyer, he is a senior consultant based in the Philippines, is chair and principal urban planner for CONCEP is the name of the consulting firm. And you can also see from the flyer that he has a long string of distinguished affiliations, fellow and past president, Philippine Institute of Environmental Planners, president of the Heritage Conservation Society, and it goes on and on. But all of that really does not do credit, does not do justice, really, I think, to the, I think I'm not at all exaggerating to say the global reputation that Dr. Van Einsiedel has in our field. I personally work in this field, have known him for about 10 years, I think beginning at a conference in Malaysia, where he was one of the principal speakers. I've had the privilege of working with him, I think at a workshop in Indonesia some years ago, presentations, and we were just recently together at a forum of the Pacific Rim Council on Urban Development in Palembang, South Sumatra, just 2 months ago, where the topic was dealing with adaptation to climate change. Something that's not mentioned in the materials that were passed out is that Dr. Van Einsiedel for many years was also involved, he was a key person in the UNDP's urban management program. At that time he was based in Kuala Lumpur. And in Bangkok.
And then Bangkok.
Yes. Along with some other illustrious figures like Dr. Yves Cabañas, who is now the director of the Development Planning Unit at University College London, was a sort of fraternal relation in that UNDP urban management program. And for people like me who work in this field, one of the things you find is that as you sort of compare notes, when you meet colleagues, when you're talking about who was working on this project, who was working on that project, there are certain names that just keep popping up again and again and again. And Dr. Van Einsiedel is clearly one of those. He's one of, so as I said, the materials that you've received in terms of his background, while they're very impressive on the surface, really do not do justice to the reputation that he has earned over many years on working in positions of senior responsibility, addressing a wide range of issues dealing with housing, urban planning, land management in general, and how to manage cities in primarily the Asia-Pacific region, and also now in terms of addressing issues of climate change. So it's a great honor for us at SPPD to be able to at last be able to welcome you here, and we're looking forward to very much to your presentation on Sorsogon City, which, as Dr. Van Einsiedel will explain, is a very interesting case of how in the Philippines, in the context of the Philippines, the initiative to bring climate change adaptation down to the city level is being undertaken. And as he will explain, this Sorsogon City is a pilot project in the Philippines, so I think there's a great deal for all of us to learn from in terms of how these sort of global concerns translate down to the ground. And we are also very fortunate to have as our discussant Dr. Alithua Abuyan Monge, who is also from the Philippines, and we are very proud to say is also an alumna of SPPD. She received her doctorate here about 5 years ago, and she also comes from actually a very distinguished lineage. Her mother is also a very famous urban planner and consultant in the Philippines, has worked with Dr. Van Einsiedel. Dr. Monge, before coming here to SPPD, had worked with the World Bank in terms of environment planning, did her master's degree at Yale in environment planning and management, came here to pursue her doctorate, which she did with great panache, produced wonderful work, also worked with Dr. Dearness and others at the Center for
Religion and Civic Culture.
Want to get it right, at the Center for Religion and Civic Culture, and is now based in San Juan Capistrano, where she's working, doing part-time work in consulting, coincidentally enough, for the Philippines on issues of climate change, adaptation, and financing, which is an area of specialty that she developed while working with the Milken Institute here in Los Angeles. So we've got an all-star cast, a great way to get us started. And so I'd like to first invite Dr. Van Einsiedel to get us rolling.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be here and given the opportunity to make this presentation, the Sorsogon City experience. As I will explain as I go through, I'll be covering the following. I'll do a little bit of introductory statements, and then a summary of the vulnerability and adaptation analysis, the findings that came out of this analysis, and then the setting of the priorities of Sorsogon involving the communities that are affected by recent flooding and typhoons, the chosen demonstration projects, the enhancement of the land use plan and city development program, and the lessons learned as the conclusion. This area in red is the Bicol region in the Philippines. And you will notice it faces the Pacific Ocean side, okay, which is where all the typhoons that hit the Philippines come from. And that red spot there is Sorsogon City. Okay. That's its land area. It has 31,292 hectares. It has a population of 151,454 and a growth rate of 1.21% per year. As I had mentioned to Professor Hikila earlier, this project is a pilot project. And the reason why we created or we chose Sorsogon is because it is very disaster prone. It was only created as a city in 2000, merging two municipalities. It's a relatively poor city. It's a fourth class component city. Component as contrasted to a chartered city. When it says component city, all its actions, including its planning and its budgeting, has to be approved by the provincial government. If it's a chartered city, it does not need the province's approval. But because this is a component city, it requires the province's approval. But it is the capital of Sorsogon province. So it's an urban center, it's an ecotourism destination, and it's an agriculture and fisheries production area. Its role in the province of Sorsogon is administrative, commercial, and educational. Photos on the right gives you a flavor of how the place looks like. You may be interested to see the three-wheeled vehicles, similar to the tuk-tuks of Bangkok. This is very popular in the Philippines. Sorsogon City is part of a small group of cities that are participating in the UN Habitat's Cities in Climate Change Initiative. And this started a couple of years back, okay? And these are the objectives of that project. Okay. Interesting among these objectives is the second to the last. The implementation of demonstrable actions for quick wins. The term of office of elected officials in the Philippines is only 3 years. Okay? So if they've never worked in the government before, they spend the first year learning what the problems are of the city. Then they start preparing plans the second year. And on the third year, they start campaigning again for the next election. So they never get to implement anything. And for this reason, this was very important that quick, demonstrable actions were chosen. Okay? And we came into the picture particularly to enhance the local government development plan systems and processes to mainstream disaster risk reduction and management and climate change adaptation. Now, as I mentioned, Sorsogon was chosen because almost all the typhoons that cross the Philippines hits Sorsogon City. That map shows you the path. And Sorsogon is right there in the middle. Okay? So every year, it gets hit by typhoons, and it floods. Roofs of houses fly away, a lot of damage, etc. Okay? And as climate change has come about, there are now more typhoons and bringing more rains and stronger winds. And it has precipitated the increased incidence of evacuation from urban coastal areas, and of course the occurrence of storm surge during typhoons. This is a typical scene during the rainy season. It also has been experiencing extreme rainfall and riverine flooding. There's a lot of flash flood events. Okay. And there are projections that the change in rainfall over the years will increase in January to August, and then drop by September to November. These are photos of recent floods where that photo on top shows that part of the road got washed away. Okay? So cutting off any communication from one side to the other side. And then this photo here shows an area that was flooded, and it took several days before the water subsided. There has been increase in temperature as well, and the projected change in temperature is that it will be rising. The maroon columns, 2 to 3% Celsius change in temperature, with 2 times CO2 scenario. And because of this, also the problem of drought. Now, there's also sea level rise because of precipitated by climate change. Okay. When we were doing this, vulnerability and adaptation analysis, we consulted with the communities that were recently flooded, and we asked them to indicate up to where the flooding took place. And that's a drawing of what the community prepared. They say that the sea level has moved inward, and then houses are needed to be moved further away. Okay. And they identified the flood-prone area as identified by the community themselves. So there's inundation of land in the coastal barangays. Barangays are neighborhood units in the Philippines. There are changes in tides as well, and the observed sea level rise in the Pacific side on the Bacon district on the Pacific Ocean side of Sorsogon City. Now, this is a satellite image during a normal situation. And when we were discussing with the community, we showed them that if there is a half-meter sea level rise, that's how much area is going to be flooded. If there were a 1 meter sea level rise, that area will be flooded. Now, when we were presenting this, the members of the community knew where the schools were, where the market is, and so they could easily identify where these places are. Okay? And with the 2 meter sea level rise, that's all you see are roofs of just a few buildings. This was a very dramatic information in the process of our explaining the rationale for adopting climate change adaptation measures. In the process, we also, in consultation with the communities, identified what we call the city hotspots. These are the areas that are subjected to storm surge, flooding, and landslides. This information came from the different communities that were affected. So the table shows you the name of the neighborhood, whether they're urban, urbanizing, or rural, the land area, and the population. Okay. And the map on the left shows you where they are. Now, the assessment also included the greenhouse gas emission profile. And as you will see, the public buildings are the ones that generate the most. After having gone through all of this, we looked into the magnitude and concentration of impacts, who, where, what, and why, and their interaction based on the analysis. The goal was to enhance city capacity for climate change resilience and responsiveness. Okay? So who? The people. 43% of the poor households, who are the ones that are most affected by this, particularly their housing, their health, their water and sanitation. Okay. The places where they live and where they conduct business. So the economic impacts, where they live, the urban hotspots, the commercial areas, and the agricultural areas. Okay. And then the institutions and governance system, the policies, environmental management and disaster risk management, the city government and community partnerships. These were kind of the agenda items that we needed to go deeper into. So this is the process and outputs that we went through. First, the analysis. And the result was a validated long list of issues and priorities. Then we had a series of prioritization meetings with the city government, and in most of these meetings, the mayor was present, which is quite unusual in the Philippines. Very often, mayors in the Philippines believe that they don't need to attend meetings like this, which is sad. But the mayor of Sorsogon City was, in fact, that was one of the reasons why Sorsogon City was chosen, because the mayor is very cooperative. So in that prioritization meeting, we identified who will be heavily burdened and where are they located. What are their needs? What are the needed immediate action? What resources does the city have available? By going through that, we produced a shorter list of priorities. Then we conducted city consultations. What are the issues? What are the options? For example, it is quite common when you talk about sea level rise, that the engineering department will say, let's raise the seawall. Okay? This is very common in the Philippines. And then we said, okay, how much will that cost? And do you have the money for it? Then they start thinking, well, we don't. Then let's talk about some other options then. Okay? So what should be the focus? Who should act? What particular department? Is it the local community itself? Etc. The result was the stakeholder agreed priority actions. After that, we formed working groups per issue to further research and detail actionable areas and quick wins. And the result of this was the identification of demonstration projects, quick win strategies, and mid to long-term plans. Okay. Housing was one of the chosen demonstration projects. You see, in the Philippines, there is a national building code that most local authorities use. And the National Building Code is a generic code. And it's very often not tailored to the circumstances of particular local governments or towns or cities. So in this case, one of the groups focused on housing to develop minimum standards for climate change resilient house structures for the socialized housing sector, which means the lower income housing sector. And the development of community-based structural assessment templates using the minimum standards to check the conditions of the houses, and the retrofitting of vulnerable structures of the poor families. For example, when it was at the height of one of the floods, there were some people who were trapped inside their houses when the water exceeded the ground floor, and the family moved up to the second floor, okay, but had no way of getting out of the house from the second floor. So one of the recommendations of this group, that for new houses, there should be a balcony in the front to serve as an escape route. Now, in areas that are really low, where there is even a possibility that the second floor is inundated, that there should be a roof hatch so they can go up to the roof and they will have a means for a helicopter to airlift them from the roof of the house. So these were some of the ideas that came out of the workshops regarding housing. Livelihood, this is also one of the demonstration projects. Because of the economic, as I mentioned, this is a relatively poor community. So typhoons and natural calamities affect the income of these people. And so we needed to baseline the community livelihoods that would be affected by climate change. And also the strengthening of the construction trades and livelihood skills training. This is to be led by the city government of Sorsogon, but in partnership with the Technology and Science Development Authority, TESDA, with the communities and some non-governmental organizations. Environmental management. Well, these are already quite commonly known. The conversion to efficient lighting fixtures, plumbing systems, etc. And the conversion of these three-wheeled vehicles to four-stroke engines, because up to now they still use two-stroke, which is highly pollutive. So the idea is to phase them out. And the local government of Sorsogon is doing this in partnership with the local energy distributor, Soreco. And they're also entering into a city sharing activity with another city, Puerto Princesa, who has successfully phased out its use of two-stroke engines to four-stroke engines. By the way, Puerto Princesa City was an awardee of UNEP for environmental management.
This is the 20-minute.
Okay. Well, then we have the retrofitting of buildings. Some institutional reforms in the preparation of, in the process of preparing plans, and how to integrate disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Now, this was another very useful information. This is the combined hazards map. Okay. The ochre-colored area is the landslide area, high risk. Okay. That's a mountain. The white portion there on the upper left corner is actually a national forest. But the ochre is the downslope, very rugged, steep slopes, and landslide prone. The green area is landslide prone, but medium risk. The difference is in the geology, the type of geology. The ochre area has loose soil and steeper slopes. The green areas are a little bit more solid and not as steep. Okay. The red, which are the strips that you find mostly at the coastal area, are the multiple hazard, high-risk areas for flooding, liquefaction, and ground settlement. So when we showed them this, we said, well, this is the condition in your place. Now we overlaid this on the existing facilities map, and we said, well, what do you want to do? So the existing land use plan, then we added the regulations coming out of this climate change and disaster resiliency analysis based on the hazards to enhance the plan. Now, this was the suggested policy zones. The reddish area, or the areas that are circumscribed in red, are the coastal, built up, and high risk. The yellow is inland, agricultural, and low risk. The blue, upland, agricultural, and forest, and medium risk. And the green is upland, protected forest, high risk. So this were the suggested policy zones, and this was deliberated by the City Council for adaptation. So for each policy zone, there was a recommended development strategy. For the coastal built-up high risk, it should be disaster risk sensitive redevelopment. For the inland agri, low risk, it's agri optimization and planned urban expansion. Upland, etc. And then the high risk at the bottom is conservation. So the lessons learned, we were able to develop detailed plans through the participatory process with the participation of the community themselves. And the test of doable actions through demonstration projects based on the village level assessments. And the formulation of policy and development frameworks from the learnings and knowledge gained. And established learning by doing approach. There is a need to strengthen the capacity of the city government in adaptation and mitigation planning, to enhance the NGOs and private sector participation in local governance. There is a tendency for the city government to do everything instead of facilitating the private sector or the communities, okay? And to strengthen the links and partnership with the national government. Sorsogon is a 45-minute flight from Manila. So it's, the national government agencies are not there. So it takes a while before the national agencies are able to respond for requests for help. And one of the recommendations is that there's a need to replicate in the smaller cities or enhance to capture the requirements of the bigger cities. That's it. Thank you very much.
So, well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Dr. Van Einsiedel, for your presentation. I just wanted to give everyone first a bigger picture or a context in which Sorsogon City operates, basically. I think you've heard from Dr. Van Einsiedel that Sorsogon City is highly vulnerable, and it really is indicative of the whole country. The Philippines, it's no surprise that we are choosing to talk about the Philippines in terms of climate change adaptation. It's because the Philippines is in extreme risk in terms of climate change. In a new climate change vulnerability index released by the firm Maplecroft, 16 countries were rated as being in extreme risk, with the Philippines coming in at number 6. And from a regional standpoint, the whole of Asia is deemed highly vulnerable. For example, in a report by the UN and the International Displacement Monitoring Center, the majority of people displaced by sudden onset climate change-related disasters that occurred in 2008 were in Asia. Approximately 31 million out of 36 million displaced worldwide. This is due to the fact that of the 20 disasters that caused displacement, 17 occurred in the Asian region. And out of Asia, the Philippines ranks 3rd on this list, with close to 3 million people displaced and evacuated. The Asian Development Bank has also concluded that the Southeast Asian region, in a study covering the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, is highly vulnerable to climate change for a number of reasons. The large percentage of the population living along coastlines, heavy reliance on agriculture for livelihoods, high poverty rates, temperature and sea level increases, and the rise of recorded heat waves, droughts, floods, and tropical cyclones. So it's a very grim picture, which is why in a country like the Philippines, the conversation regarding climate change is really nothing new. But what is surprising is the national strategies to address climate change are pretty recent. For example, the Climate Change Act was only passed in 2009, and this law directs the mainstreaming of climate change into government policy formulations, the development of a framework strategy and program on climate change, and the creation of a climate change commission. Most notably, though, this Climate Change Act of 2009 recognizes the role of local government units, for example, the city government of Sorsogon, to be on the front line of the formulation, planning, and implementation of climate change action plans in their respective areas. This is all good news for local government agencies because, you know, when we talk about development planning, etc., it's always best to respect and resort to the expertise of the locals. We want their local knowledge, the local context to plan for programs such as this. But the problem is, and this has always been a big problem for everybody, is the money, the funding. Where do we get the finances to implement all these programs? So right now there is a bill pending in Congress called the People's Survival Fund, which I'm actually helping to pass in an indirect way. This will help achieve the objectives of the Climate Change Act by providing funds to local governments and communities to support their adaptation activities. This is quite necessary in that right now when local governments need to respond to disasters or if they need to implement climate change related activities, they have to dip into their other budget priorities such as education, healthcare, housing, and obviously that's not sustainable and not an ideal solution. So the money from the People's Survival Fund will give a lot of support to these local government units. What else? So another development on the national scene that local governments can take advantage of is the new National Urban Development and Housing Framework. Professor Dr. Van Einsiedel talked about this comprehensive land use plan and the changing of maybe the zoning ordinances that can help Sorsogon City become a more disaster resilient city. But through the National Urban Development and Housing Framework, there are certain themes that cities can take advantage of, or they can use these to mainstream climate change into their urban development. For example, in urban competitiveness, that's one theme. Cities can plan for how do we make our infrastructure more resilient to disasters so that, for example, their tourism industry won't get interrupted in terms of the services that they offer, etc. In the future, obviously, the cities that are resilient to climate change will be the most competitive because they'll still be standing. A second theme would be poverty alleviation. Under this housing framework, they don't really explicitly mention climate change under poverty alleviation, but if you think about it, climate change can be mainstreamed under this theme through providing alternative livelihoods for those people who are dependent on the sea or the land for their livelihoods, agriculture, fisheries, things like that. Another theme is housing affordability and delivery. Basically figuring out how to build appropriate kinds of housing and where to build these housing structures, especially for the low income groups, and finding innovative financing arrangements for those who can't readily afford such housing. And another theme is sustainable communities. Climate change was mentioned under this theme, but they can be more explicit in planning how communities can respond to the vulnerabilities they face in the context of climate change. In PPD 461, Sustainability Planning, which I taught for 2 semesters, I touched on climate change was a thread throughout the semester in terms of how to plan for an urban setting that will be resilient and prepared for the onset of climate change. And finally, another theme that the National Urban Development and Housing Framework touches upon is performance-oriented governance. This theme should consider climate change as an issue given the responsibilities of the local government units in the implementation of the Climate Change Act of 2009. And basically, it wants to drive home the point, well, how does the leadership of the city act on climate change? How well do our leaders understand the seriousness of the issue? And how well will they deliver on their climate change action plans? So I think that Sorsogon City is really on the right track. It is very unfortunate that in a lot of cases in the Philippines, the poor communities are the most vulnerable. Not only do they have really weak infrastructure, but the local government units don't have a lot of money to implement their plans. So I guess we can open it up to questions. And one thing off the top of my head, though, is if we could clarify to the audience why we're talking about adaptation instead of mitigation. Like, what's the difference between the two? Because we hear a lot about climate change mitigation and adaptation. And in this context, why are we focusing on adaptation?
So again, I will perhaps take 3 or 4 questions and then allow both the speaker and the discussant, if they wish, to sort of comment on those, because some of even if the questions are separate, some of the responses might be more integrated. So beginning with this young lady.
Yes, I'd like to thank Dr. Einsiedel and Dr. Mon and Professor Akela. My question is...
Well, maybe I could ask you all to introduce yourselves as well. We're in a new semester, and so not everyone here knows each other. So.
Okay, sure. My name is Marietta, and this is my last semester here at SVGD. I'm in the MPA program. And for the past 2 summers, I have been doing some research in the Philippines, which is why I'm here, and I was very interested in climate change issues in the country. And my research is on slums and urban poverty, with a focus on relocation and resettlement. And yes, I'll be graduating at the end of the year and looking for a job. So my question has to do with, and Dr. Monchi touched upon this a little bit, the role of the central government, the national government level, in the planning and financing of this adaptive capacity to climate change programs. Locally in the Philippines, do they see it as primarily the responsibility of the national government or the local government units to implement and finance these programs?
Okay, and see if we have some other questions to pool. Yes, sir.
My name is Tang Kyung-gang, and I am the first year PhD student in Plain Track. I want to ask a question about if there is any instance that you have succeeded to relocate the community for the adaptation process, because for some cases there are the registry and land administration is so complex. It is not ever possible to mobilize the community to move out and to relocate.
Okay, these are good questions. Dr. Dearness.
Yes, thank you. I'm teaching a course right now, Sustainable Tourism, here in the school. And we'll take my students down to Costa Rica in December to work on a project. But one of the issues that comes up, and our project is in a coastal area, so there's a lot of similarities in terms of global climate change. And it comes out of what Ali, you were talking about in terms of the defining between mitigation and adaptation and what impact that is. I'm especially wondering, you mentioned ecotourism as being a site there, but I wonder what's being done to mitigate against it in, like, for example, aside from just raising the dikes or the sea walls, is there any concept of building mangrove, of planting mangroves, and what are the issues, what are the things that the community sees as viable for mitigation?
So I think maybe we've got already a rich pool of questions, so.
Okay, do I need to repeat the question?
Might be, or you could perhaps incorporate it into your answer,
okay.
So that
well,
it may be inferred.
Okay, to the first question about the role of the national government, well, when the Philippines experienced severe flooding about 2.5 years ago. There was this increased awareness and appreciation for disaster risk mitigation. Okay? Because prior to that, the national government was promoting disaster preparedness. So it was more a relief kind of operations, and it was designed by the military. So it was not preventive, it was reactive. And when this big floods came and flooded a lot of areas that never flooded before, then they said, you know, we need to change our approach. And so the national government said, we need to come up with a set of policies that will have to be translated to implementation up to the city level. In fact, even up to the neighborhood, to the barangay level. So from the national, there are guidelines that have been prepared so that the implementation is actually done at the local government level. However, many local governments do not have sufficient funds. And so therefore the national government has to assist the local governments in, I believe the approach or strategy that's being used is for the local governments to receive financial assistance, they have to show that they have prepared plans. They have prepared improvement plans. They have mainstreamed. So the word mitigation is used usually with disaster risk reduction, and adaptation is used with climate change. And I think the reason for this is because the scientists believe that sea level rise is going to happen. So it's a matter of adapting to it. Now, there are a lot of communities that are coastal and are therefore subject to sea level rise. Okay? And so in answer to the second question about relocating these families, the successful cases of relocation applied to informal settlers. Those who do not own title to the land that they occupy. These are informal settlers who just, you know, put up their shanties near the seawall. And they become a big burden to the local government when there's a storm surge and floods. When there's a storm surge and there's heavy rainfall, these places will flood. And so it becomes a big burden for government to evacuate these families. So relocation sites have been developed for them. Okay? It's not an easy process, but in some cases there has been some success. The reason why they don't want to move out of where they live, even if they experience flooding, is because the jobs, their livelihood, are all near those areas. They're actually maybe fishermen or vendors who derive their livelihood from that place. So if your relocation site is somewhere in the mountains, it's not acceptable most of the time. Okay. Now, to the third question of, what's the third question?
Tourism.
Yes. In my own private practice, my own private consulting work, I have discovered that tourism is a very effective door opener to local governments, especially in the Philippines. The mayors and the local officials easily understand the benefits of tourism. There are, beaches, there are forests. So when you sell them the idea of, let's come up with a ecotourism master plan, they get all excited about it. Okay, so it's a good door opener. And once you're in, then you say, well, we need to plant mangroves here, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. So it's an effective way of bringing in related concerns.
Trojan seahorse.
Yes, yes, yes. Most local governments believe that they're the next Boracay, and so they want to have a tourism master plan. We don't use the term sustainable tourism because that scares them. Okay, we use that when we write the report. Okay? But when we're just discussing with them in the beginning, we just say ecotourism. So it's easy. It's an easier sell.
Dr. Maj, do you have any comments?
Yeah,
And let's just compass this.
Oh, you can hear. Okay, that's fine. Yes, I wanted to comment on the
Speaking to his lapel.
on the financing. Yes, so local governments do not have enough money to implement these programs. And in fact, for example, let's take the town of St. Bernard, which is another municipality in the Philippines that is terribly disaster prone. It's in the Visayas region, and they were the victims of a huge landslide. They recovered from that, and they had all these disaster management plans laid out, and then they were struck again by a huge typhoon. So now their contingency funds were wiped out, their disaster management money was wiped out. And so this is why we're trying to pass this People's Survival Fund, because it will be nationally funded straight from, the President's contingency fund will kick in some money, plus we will get some funds from foreign and public sources. And this will be a direct access fund for local governments. So hopefully, if that gets passed, then they'll have a reprieve. They won't have to worry about where to find money for their climate change adaptation programs. But this is competitive. They need to lay out plans in accordance to the guidelines that will be set by the fund board. So that's yep.
Can I get a question?
Sure.
Yes,
We've got time for one or two more questions.
Okay, my name is David, and I'm a first NPL student. I was wondering, what is the most difficult and most challenging part of you trying to push these plans to the local government?
And let's, while we take that question, let's just see if there's any more. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Seeing none, I'll add my own, which is this. You had mentioned this as a pilot project. So what's next?
Sorry. Actually, I forgot to say something about the mitigation and adaptation. Also, mitigation is used, to prevent the consequences of climate change. So usually when we hear that term, we think about, how do we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? That's basically what mitigation is. But in the developed country context, that's well and good, because based on the scientific data, they are the ones responsible for a lot of these emissions. So in the developing country context, we don't really talk about mitigation, and because like the Philippines, we're already experiencing the effects of climate change, then we just do the adaptation. How do we cope? How well do we adjust to the effects of climate change? So what programs exactly were you referring to? The climate change action programs?
Climate change adoption for ecotourism. When you're trying to push the plan, because you guys seem to be really in charge of it. I was just wondering, what are your most difficult challenges when you're trying to make changes, to those places. What is the most difficult part that you find it?
Well, one of the most difficult obstacles is the lack of appreciation for forward planning. Okay? Mainly because of the short term of office of elected officials of 3 years. Okay? And so they are not motivated to go into long-term plans. Okay? Before, several years back, the system was that short-term plan was 5 years, medium term was 10, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and long-term was 20. Okay? Now, because it didn't work, it was changed to short-term 3 years, medium-term 6 years, and long-term 9 years. Because a mayor, an elected official, can run 2 more times. So he can serve for a maximum of 3 terms, or 9 years. So now that seems to be working much better. Okay? So that was one of the major difficulties, motivating the mayors to think longer term. They didn't want to be associated with a plan that gets implemented after they finish their term. And it's their successor who gets the credit for it. So this is a major deterrent. So there are moves now, there are some talks now about revising the Constitution to change that term of office of elected officials. I don't know whether it's going to work or not. But another major difficulty, aside from the lack of funds of local governments, is that the very low level of capability of local government staff. Okay. I mean, you have a city engineer or you have a city planning officer, but very often they're completely useless. And so it's very frustrating. They have the titles, they have the position, but they don't do what they're supposed to do. So and they undergo training, okay? They are very interested, and they very often apply for training, especially if it's abroad, okay? Once they get the training, then they resign and join the private sector. So you start all over again, training new people. So it's a vicious circle of non-stop training of staff.
Good. Well, actually, this this does bring us pretty much to the time we need to feed our speaker before the University Club closes. We give a warm round of applause to our speaker and discussant.
So if you have any follow-up questions, you can email me. If you want to write it down, abuyuan@gmail.com. Oh, there's a blackboard.
ABUYUAN.
At Gmail. I think my USC account died.
We're also... Well, same for me. My email is there.